Hello, class. I'm back. It's Professor Streeter. Sorry it took me so long to complete this series of videos on the week's slideshow, on the week 3 slideshow. My wife is recovering. It's a lot of work caring for her, and just a lot of little things that need to be done. A lot of stress. But she's going to have surgery on Monday, and then we'll go from there. I think she'll probably be in a cast for about 12 weeks. So. Okay, so keep her in your thoughts. I am going to come back to the slideshow. I ended the second part thinking about the contrast between subjectivism and objectivism. And as you recall, Heathwood, in defending the desire satisfaction theory, is defending a version of subjectivism, which means for him that my welfare depends on what I desire. So let's take, it depends on some subjective state of mind. So the measure of whether my life is going better for me is whether some desire of mine or some set of desires of mine is being satisfied. So, right, in that sense, it's subjective. My welfare is measured in relationship to me, the subject, my desires. One interesting thing about this is it implies that anytime my net desires are being satisfied, anytime my desires are being satisfied, my life is going better for me, right? No matter what the desires happen to be. So the example of Bundy in the Heathwood article, right, is the example of someone who has evil desires. And so from Heathwood's point of view, even though we wouldn't say that Bundy's life is good, for example, it's morally bad, and there's many ways of criticizing Bundy's life to show that it's not a good life. But with respect to the question of welfare, Heathwood thinks that since Bundy's desires are being satisfied, even though they're evil desires, up until the point he gets caught, right? At the moment that he gets caught, his net desires are no longer being satisfied. Once he gets caught, many of his other desires are frustrated. But so long as before he gets caught, right, his ability to satisfy his evil desires does not obstruct, which are to kill people, does not obstruct his other desires, to enjoy lunch or to enjoy a night's sleep or to enjoy watching a video or, all the other things that he desires, right? Once he gets caught, not only is he no longer able to satisfy his evil desires, but he's not able to satisfy any of his other desires because he's in prison. Okay. But so the question is, before he gets caught, does the satisfaction of Bundy's evil desires benefit him? Does it make his life go better for him? And Heathwood bites the bullet, as they say, and says yes. Why? Because Heathwood is a subjectivist about welfare. The only measure of a person's welfare is, right, something subjective, namely the net satisfaction the satisfaction of their net desires. Okay, so let's come back to the slide. And so some people will clearly object to that account because they'll claim that, look, there's no sense in which Bundy's life is going well, right? Why? Not because his desires aren't being satisfied, but because his desires are evil, right? And so his life would be going better if he had different desires, right? That's what an objectivist wants to say. So now this is true of morality from Heathwood's point of view. Remember, Heathwood is an objectivist about morality. So he agrees that Bundy's life is morally bad. Right? Why? Because the measure of morality is not a person's subjective state, right? Whether my life is a good one from a moral point of view does not depend on any subjective state of mind. It doesn't depend on my desires, on my feelings, on my attitudes. Right? What it does depend on is a different question. Okay, so that's where we ended up. I want to move to the next slide. And, one thing that you can do here, let me make this full screen so we can think about it. One thing you can do as a reader when you're looking at Heathwood, and then you turn, let's say, to Hooker, right? Brad Hooker's essay is defending a form of objectivism about well-being, right? For Hooker, there are many objective measures of welfare. So desire satisfaction is something that contributes to a person's welfare, right? So my life is going better for me insofar as my important desires are being satisfied. Hooker would agree with that, but that is one aspect or one component of what it means to say that my life is going well. Or that's one component of my well-being. And sometimes Hooker would say, satisfying desires of mine does not make my life go better, right? So, okay, but anyway, thinking about this debate between subjectivism and objectivism, it's useful to think of examples of subjective and objective qualities. Like a purely subjective quality, something that seems to depend entirely on my attitudes and desires and feelings is, I'm actually drinking a cup of coffee right now, right? Whether a cup of coffee is tasty, right? The tastiness of coffee is an entirely subjective quality, right? It depends on the attitudes and the desires and the feelings of the subject, right? There is no objective measure of tastiness. Something can be tasty for me, right? But not tasty for you. That's another way of thinking about it, right? Because when I drink the coffee, right, it produces a state of a positive state in me, and it produces a desire for more in me, and that's what makes it tasty, right, for me. But it might not produce a positive mental state in you, and it might not produce a desire in you. It might spit it out. So you would not say that it's tasty, right? Now, that's because tastiness is a subjective state. Right? Something can be tasty for me, but not tasty for you. Okay. An example of a purely objective quality is, let's say, the shape of the book that you have in your hands. Right? It's a rectangle. Right? The quality of being rectangular is purely objective. There's an objective measure of rectangularity. We can define what makes something a rectangle independently of the subject, independently of how I see it, how it makes me feel. Okay, certainly independent of how it tastes. But right, whether the book looks rectangular to me in this moment or not does not determine whether it is rectangular. So it might not look rectangular to me, but still it is rectangular, because being rectangular is an objective quality. We can define it mathematically, right, without making reference to how it looks to me at this moment. So that's an example of a purely objective quality. Or let's say, thinking about chemistry, right? What makes this water is not that it tastes like water to me or looks like water, but that it's composed of 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule, H2O. That is the measure of what makes something water, right? Whether its chemical molecular composition, right? That's a structural property of this substance that's independent of how it feels or looks or tastes to me. So something can be water even if it doesn't taste like water or look like water, right? And something can taste and look like water but be something else, right? If it's not composed of 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule, it's not water. Okay, so those are purely objective qualities. So think, that's a spectrum, right? You can think about purely subjective qualities and purely objective qualities, okay? We're thinking about the quality of well-being and the quality of morality. These are the two qualities that I've sort of put out there, but we're focusing on welfare. Right? Where does welfare fall in that spectrum? Is it more like tastiness, or is it more like rectangularity? Same question can be asked about morality, like what makes a life moral or what makes an action moral, right? Is it a more subjective quality like tastiness, the tastiness of the coffee, or is it a more objective quality like the shape of a book, right? Something that can be defined independently of our attitudes. Okay. Now, Heathwood argues that welfare is more like tastiness. It's a purely subjective quality. And he makes an argument to defend that. Hooker makes a different kind of argument. Hooker thinks that there are objective measures of welfare. Not to deny that there are subjective measures, right? But there is more to a person's well-being than the satisfaction of their desires, Hooker will argue. Okay? So that's something you have to think about. Where do you stand in relation to Heathwood and Hooker? Right? Are you more of a subjectivist about welfare or more of an objectivist, and why? What's your argument? Okay, okay. We still have a few minutes. I have to stop at 15 minutes, so we're about 10 minutes in. Next slide. So here's Hooker. Hooker defends what's called an objectivist theory of welfare or well-being. It's an objective account, right? Getting what you want is not the fundamental measure of welfare, according to Hooker. So, and this is something that Schaefer-Landau discusses in chapter 4, where he looks at problems with the desire satisfaction theory. So the problems for the desire theory. Well, and he gives examples, not Hooker, but Schaefer-Landau gives examples of instances where you get what you want, you satisfy your desires, but your life isn't going any better for you. So that would suggest that getting what you want or satisfying your desires is not sufficient for welfare. If you can think of examples where you satisfy all of your desires, but I don't know, you're no better off for it. That would be one problem with the subjectivist account. Giving a counterexample to the sufficiency condition that we talked about in the last video. A second problem would be an example where your life goes better for you, like your life is going better for you, but you're not satisfying any new desire, right? You're not getting what you want in some interesting sense. So Schaefer-Landau in chapter 4 looks at those two potential problems for the desire satisfaction theory, right? We can talk about that in class. Like one example, like on page 51, is that some of our desires are based on false beliefs, right? And so sometimes we want something thinking that it will make us better off, but since we don't understand what it is that we want, what we're getting into, when we satisfy that desire, it actually makes us worse off, okay? So that's one example of a problem for the sufficiency condition. But that's on page 51. And then on page 51, he looks at a problem with the necessity condition. So from page 51 until page 56 or 7 of chapter 4 of the Problems for Desire Theory, Schaefer-Landau looks at all of these different ways in which you may be getting what you want, but it doesn't make your life better. He objects to the necessity condition just on page 50 and 51. He doesn't spend as much time there. But that would be coming up with examples of your life is going better, but you're not getting what you want. Maybe it's harder to come up with those examples. Okay, so he spends most of his time on the sufficiency condition, where you are getting what you want, but it doesn't make your life better. Okay, but Hooker, it sort of doesn't take for granted, but he's trying to show why getting what you want is not the fundamental measure of welfare, not by kind of raising objections so much to the desire satisfaction theory that you see, say, in Heathwood, but by showing that there are other measures of the good life that go beyond desire satisfaction. Okay, so I'm going to have to pause now. We'll come back with the next video. Okay.